What if I told you that some of the strongest, most lasting structures in the entire universe aren't really made of solid stuff at all? What if they're actually built from empty space, from intelligently placed gaps? It sounds completely backwards, right? But today we're going to see how this invisible architecture of contrast is the key to, well, pretty much everything, from sending a signal across a hostile landscape all the way to the very nature of memory and even mass itself. So our story kicks off way back in the 19th century with this just brilliant piece of engineering, the Fresnel lens. See, before this, lighthouse lenses were these enormous, heavy, clunky pieces of glass. But this guy, Augustin Jean Fresnel, he had a totally radical idea. He realized you don't need the whole solid lens. Nope. All you really need is the curved surface where the light bending happens. So he sliced a lens up into these concentric rings and then squashed them down flat, and boom. He created a lens with all the power of the original, but using just a tiny fraction of the material. It's the perfect example of doing more with less, not through brute force, but through smart design. Now, there's a fancy scientific name for the principle behind this lens: structural heterogeneity. But really, all it means is that a system can get stronger and more resilient by having an organized mix of strong parts and weak parts, solid material and empty gaps, instead of just being solid all the way through. The lens works because the contrast between the glass and the air is organized in just the right way to bend light. That organized contrast, that's the secret sauce. Okay, so let's fast forward about 150 years. We're going to jump from that old lighthouse lens to a very different, very modern engineering problem. On the surface, it has absolutely nothing to do with lenses or lighthouses, but as you're about to see, the solution hinges on the exact same idea. So here's the situation. We're at the Cojo Jalima Ranch. It's super remote, and the goal is to get a live, high-res video feed from a gate camera to a base 8 miles away. The problem? Well, the terrain is mountainous, it's rugged, there's no power grid anywhere nearby, and the whole system has to run completely on its own, just using solar power. I mean, trying to send a fragile digital signal that far in those conditions, it's a huge, huge task. The solution they came up with was just beautiful. Instead of trying to build one single impossibly powerful transmitter, they created what's called a multi-hop repeater system. Honestly, you can just think of it like a bucket brigade for information. They set up a series of 3 solar-powered repeater sites, each with a couple of directional radios, and placed them in this perfect chain across the landscape. Each site would catch the signal from the one before it and then throw it to the next one. It created this stable, protected little pathway through what was otherwise a really chaotic environment. And this right here. This is where it all clicks. On the left, you've got the glass rings of the Fresnel lens. On the right, you've got the chain of repeater sites dotting the landscape. I mean, they look totally different, right? But functionally, they are identical. Both of these systems create persistence by creating these pockets of high structure, the glass, the repeaters, which are separated by weaker, less structured areas, the air, the empty land. That repeater network is literally a Fresnel lens for information. And the big question, did it work? Oh yeah, it worked perfectly. The signal got to the base 8 miles away with incredible strength and quality. It showed that the connection wasn't just working, it was extremely stable and tough. This real-world success was proof that this architecture of smart gaps could solve what seemed like an impossible problem. But the story doesn't stop with just a cool engineering solution, because solving this problem accidentally uncovered something way deeper. It wasn't just a clever trick. It turned out to be a physical example of a universal law about how systems hold on to information. How they remember. And this is where it gets really wild. What if that repeater network, that chain of stable points in a noisy world, is actually a model for how memory itself works? And I'm not just talking about computers. I mean in our brains, in societies, even in physics. So check out this graph. It's called the persistence gap, and it comes from simulations that tested this exact idea. That red line shows a uniform system, one without any structure. Information just spreads out and disappears. It's forgotten. But look at the blue line. That shows a system with these structured pockets. The information takes a little dip at first, but then it levels out, it stabilizes, it persists. That gray area between the two lines, that's the persistence gap. And it's the visual proof of this whole idea. It shows us that structure, that organized contrast, is what gives memory the power to survive against the constant background noise of the universe. This insight lets us take a huge leap. I mean, if this architecture works for radio signals, and we can see in simulations that it works for abstract information, could it be the basic architecture for all memory, including the thoughts inside our own heads? This leads us to this amazing idea of pockets of emergent memory. In this view, a memory isn't really a thing that you store somewhere. It's more like an echo that a structure can hold on to. These pockets are just regions with high connectivity, like those repeater sites or the glass rings, that trap information, letting it bounce around and persist instead of just fading away. A really simple analogy makes this crystal clear. In a uniform, homogeneous system, information is like dropping a pebble into a still pond. The ripples just spread out, they get weaker and weaker, and then they're gone. But in a structured, heterogeneous system, it's like shouting into a canyon. The shape of the canyon, all its surfaces and pockets, traps the sound, creating echoes that bounce around and last long after you stopped shouting. All right, now we get to the final and honestly the biggest expansion of this idea. Because it turns out this simple pattern, these pockets of structure creating persistence, it isn't just for signals or memory. It seems to be a fundamental grammar of reality itself, a pattern that repeats at every single scale you can imagine, from the subatomic to the societal. This might just be the most mind-blowing example of all. The radical idea here is that a particle's mass, how solid it is, might not be some fixed property. Instead, it could be an emergent property, kind of like an echo. It happens because of a resonance between a particle's energy and these structured pockets in a purely mathematical space. So in this view, a heavier particle is just one that rings or resonates more strongly inside a denser, more complex mathematical pocket. It's pretty wild. Now let's scale way up to our own minds. This model suggests that our thoughts are basically navigating a landscape that's full of these stable pockets of meaning. A subject is one pocket, a verb is another, and grammar gives us the stable, allowed pathways between them. A sentence like "the dog chased the ball" is a nice, smooth path. But "ball the chased dog they," well, that's like trying to go off-roading into a swamp. It's just not a stable path. So in a way, grammar itself is the invisible architecture that lets our thoughts hang together and make sense. And we can scale up one last time, all the way to history. To understand really complex systems without our own biases getting in the way, we can use this same grammar: condition, event, outcome. So the condition is, say, the political climate of a country. The event is a big election or a revolution, and the outcome is the new stable state of things that comes after. This simple framework lets us map how any system changes over time, just by tracking how events create new persistent structures, new pockets of stability. So let's just pull all these threads together. We've gone from a lighthouse lens to an 8-mile radio signal to the mass of a particle, all the way to the grammar of a sentence. And we've seen the exact same fundamental principle at work in every single case. And the implications are just huge. This quote really captures it perfectly. It's suggesting that the most solid thing we can possibly think of, mass, isn't fundamental. It emerges. It's what happens when a pattern, a little pocket of structure, gets so dense that it lasts. At its core, solidity is just a stable echo. So if you take just one thing away from all this, let it be this. The most important things are often not the things themselves, but the relationships and the gaps between them. Persistence, memory, identity, maybe even existence itself. They don't seem to come from solid, uniform stuff. They arise from an invisible architecture of contrast, a design that allows stable patterns to emerge and hold their shape against the constant, crushing pressure of chaos. And that really leaves us with one final thought. Once you start looking for this principle, I promise you will see it absolutely everywhere. In your habits, your friendships, your workplace, your society. So the question to ask yourself is, what are the invisible structures, the pockets and the gaps, that are shaping your world?